3, 2, 1. Welcome to Potter Familias. Coming to you from Fairhope, Alabama.
I'm Todd Sylvester.
And I'm Stephen Sylvester.
I was a little disappointed when I got my Apple Watch.
Really? Why?
Because I thought it was going to be able to FaceTime.
Oh, you mean like in the 60s where they were trying to
Tracy.
guess? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I thought it was going to be a Dick Tracy watch.
Okay, well, hang on. Have you heard about what the newest, most updated Apple, I forget if it's 5 or 6 or whatever it is now, but the newest Apple Watch, do you know what it can do?
What?
If you have it connected to, I guess because you can get them where some of them have cell service and some of them don't.
Yeah, mine has cell service.
Yeah, so if it's connected to your phone and it's able to access whatever it would need to make a call, it can detect if it thinks that you're having a heart attack and call an ambulance.
Come on.
I'm serious.
That's super
because
cool.
I saw it and I was like, there's no way that's real. And they were like, yep, we've thoroughly tested the product to make sure that it actually can get an EKG reading. Now, it's not as accurate as they would need to determine if you're having a heart attack at the hospital, because those machines obviously are very expensive, but it can get close enough to at least let you know, hey, you should probably go to the hospital.
That's tremendous.
Isn't that amazing?
And not only is it amazing, but I think that's exactly what technology should be doing as it advances, because that's really good for people.
I agree.
I think that's tremendous, but I still want the Dick Tracy watch. And it turns out I actually did a little bit of research, and they have the technology to do it.
Okay.
But they're afraid what people will do with it. Because if you have a camera on the watch, then you can stealthily photograph and videotape in situations that you probably shouldn't be.
Yeah, like inappropriate situations. Yeah. I see.
Isn't that a bummer?
That is a bummer.
So because of that, I can't have my Dick Tracy watch.
Thanks a lot, pervs.
Or whoever. I just want my Dick Tracy watch. I want to be able to sit there and go, yes, honey. Look, it's Siri's trying to pick up. And it's like, yes. I'm like, no, not now. But I would want to be like, call mom, and I want to see her. FaceTime mom.
Right, I was going to say, you can say that with fewer words.
Be quiet. Punch it up. Get out of here.
You're showing your age.
I don't care. I'm old. And I'm okay with being old.
No, I love it.
I gotta be me.
It's the main thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
When we first had you, I don't remember if we knew. Did we know that you were a boy?
No, you thought I was a girl.
Oh, that's right, because we didn't.
Because remember, in the ultrasound, I was very modest.
That's right. We could only afford one ultrasound, because after that we had to pay out of pocket.
Modest is hottest, Dad.
And the poor tech was like, I'm sorry, we can't tell whether it's a boy or a girl. And
he was making me uncomfortable.
Okay, whatever. The point was, when we had you, though, I had some friends of mine who were like, oh, you're so lucky. You got your boy first.
Really?
And then when we had your sister, our next child,
everybody assumed
everyone was like, oh, you're done. You got your boy and you got your girl. And, you know, in learning and talking with people, they would talk about the differences between raising sons and daughters. And I know culturally,
that's such a weird sentiment.
It is a weird sentiment, but think about it. Like everything that was going on in China during the one-child policy. I mean, you had all these people that were aborting daughters because they wanted to have their one son. And that's the reason why there's a lot more males now in China than there are females.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's
still
it's uncomfortable.
Here it's strange, though. In China, that I can see where there's the pressure from the government.
You say it's strange, but there's
No. I understand why people think that way, but it's still strange to me, especially now as a dad. I'm just like how can you think that it's okay, even if you've been raised to think that really is a principle or something that you should follow for your own life? How can you think it's okay to assume that every other family, that every other person was raised to think the same thing?
Yeah.
And maybe that's a deeper problem with the way that people think about the way they were raised in general, but I digress.
Well, I would hope that they were just kind of half joking. Like I know, man. I have one friend that has 6 daughters, and he goes, "Pray for me. I have 6 weddings to try to save money for."
Yeah.
and I know he's kind of half joking because
Well, that is less of a thing that I would have a problem with. What I have a problem with is other people projecting their values onto you and then being either confused or uncomfortable when you don't immediately agree.
Gotcha. And that does make sense because I was so young when we had you that when people would say stuff like that, I would be like, okay, thanks. You know, like I didn't know what to say.
And I'm mean, so that never happened for me.
I was just super excited. I was super excited to have you. I was super excited to have.
Have I ever told you the story about when we went for the ultrasound for our fourth one for Sam?
No.
I haven't told you this story?
I don't remember.
Okay, so I'm almost positive that I've told you this at least once. But
refresh my memory.
It is a great story.
Okay, let's hear it.
So we went in there, and it was another one of those situations where somebody was half joking, and I had about had enough of it at that point. Now, you know that I'm not a very nice person when it comes to, like, just in general.
Oh, Lord.
So this is what happened. So the nurse is looking at Afton, and she's like, okay, all right, looks like the baby's progressing just fine, and this is how many for y'all? And Afton is like, It's number 4 in 5 years. I know we're crazy. And I was just kind of going like, yeah, number 4. And the nurse kind of goes, oh. And then she turns to me and she's like, do we need to give you a biology lesson? And without skipping a beat, I kind of did one of these where if y'all are just listening to this, you can't see, but I kind of made this face like I was worried. And I like wanted to come talk to her privately. And I was like, okay, so I was homeschooled and nobody ever really explained any of this stuff to me. So why does my wife keep getting pregnant? Can you please explain?
Did you really say that?
I did. And for a second I got her. And then she was like, oh. And I was like, don't say stupid things like that. Come on.
I know. But people just kind of go along with it. The point, though, concerning this podcast.
Not me. I don't do that. That's dumb.
All right. I know that.
Break cultural conventions.
Why do you think we're here?
Stick it to the man, bro.
Not just the man. Stick it to anyone who doesn't understand.
Okay, well, hang on. So just all joking aside, I am kind of a social contrarian in that way. I don't like when everyone just assumes, and this is a big thing in the South too. And I know that we have another thing to talk about, but this is something that I feel passionate about. So in the South, there is this sense that everyone sort of generally believes the same stuff. Just generally. Even if that's the first question people ask, because it's the most important, and it's a distinction that you can immediately make because people are very clearly on one side or the other, is are you for Alabama or Auburn when you first come to the state? Because everyone wants to know, because that is the most important cultural disagreement that we have. There is no other one that is more significant and more culturally divisive here. And even that is, it's not that serious for most people, but everybody wants to know, because everything else, when it comes to faith or family or the way that you live your life, is all generally the same. It's all generally agreed upon. And if you break from that in any way, it's considered rude.
Wow.
Now, and that's just my experience. I don't know if that's true for everybody, but I don't know if this is because of you or because of Mom. It's probably Mom. Thanks, Mom. I appreciate you. I am not down with that.
Yeah.
And I'm not down with it on the level of foundational intellectual morality. When somebody just assumes that I'm going to go along with something that I really don't agree with, I cannot stay silent. I physically can't. And now I try not to be super mean about it or blunt or make people cry or try to start a fight. I don't do that. But in a situation like that where someone is clearly projecting a cultural value onto my life that I don't agree with, I'll be like, nah, man, I don't agree with that. Sorry. And that's usually the end of the conversation, because everyone is so surprised that I said something and I didn't just go like, it's funny. Anyway, have a great day. Good to see you too. How's your mama? It's like, you got your boy and your girl. I bet you're done. No, we're going to have 12 more.
I hope. Yeah.
And people react like you've said, it's like somebody said, oh, you got your girl and your boy. And you're like, I worship the god Moloch.
What?
That's how they react. Exactly. The face that you're making, they react as if I've said something that is meaningless, because it's so weird for anybody in the cultural South to say or do anything that's outside of the norm.
Right.
And it's probably true everywhere, but I've only grown up in the South. I don't really have any other experience of growing into my role as a dad and as a husband in being a young adult. So my experience has been very much like everybody just assumes that value system that you were talking about of, oh, you have your boy and your girl, you're done. Or, oh, isn't that great that you had a boy first? Everybody assumes that they all think the same way. And if you say, hey, I actually don't think that way about this particular thing, then people look at you like you have two heads.
Well, and that kind of leads us into what we're talking about today, because there's this big push when you're talking about the differences between raising a son and daughter. Nowadays, what they want to say is there is no difference, and you shouldn't be raising them any differently because you don't even know what's going on inside them, and there might be some kind of turmoil of how they feel inside their bodies.
You mean about gender?
Yeah. And so there shouldn't be any difference in the way that you raise a son or a daughter.
Not here in the South.
Well, but I don't even think that it's just a Southern thing. I think appropriately there are differences.
Yeah, I mean, that's patently obvious to anyone who's a parent.
Well, but I don't know how obvious it is, because there's some weird news stories out there.
That may be.
It's like, we're not going to cut our child's hair unless they want it cut.
I've read those stories too, but it's patently obvious to anyone who is, well, maybe it's not, because I was about to say it's patently obvious to any person who's raising a child who's even relatively normal. So I don't want to speak to anybody's experience who feels different, because obviously I don't know what that's like. I feel like my childhood was relatively normal and our family was relatively normal. But that aside, I think that just based on biology and basic psychology and how people think and behave, I feel like it should be patently obvious to anyone who has children that boys and girls are very different.
And they're not, I don't think they're as different per se as people make it out to be.
No, but you see the differences in a more profound way when you are experiencing it all the time.
Yeah.
When you're a parent. Like if you're looking at somebody else's family, they might be like, oh, man, it is so much harder raising this one than that one. And you might look and say, is it though? I mean, they're not acting that differently. But if you're in it all the time, those differences would be amplified.
And we have 6 sons and 4 daughters.
Yeah.
And there's very different personalities. There's different temperaments. There's different learning styles. There's different love languages. It's all over the map. But there is, to me, a clear distinction between the sons and the daughters.
Really?
And I don't believe that was something that we forced on them. We kind of gave it to where, like, we had foam swords for everyone, didn't we?
Yes, we did. It was awesome.
And everyone used them. But there was a difference between the way the boys would use them and the girls would use them. And I'm not saying, oh, the girls would go tink, tink, tink. That's enough. Now let's go have a tea party. It wasn't like that. I mean, some of your sisters would go to town, but the girls never drew blood with a foam sword.
That's fair.
And all of the boys did.
Yes, we did.
And Mom was like, how? How did you make each other bleed with a foam sword? And I'm like, because they're boys. They're going to find a way to make each other bleed. That's because they're boys.
And I think that is like, there's nothing about that statement that makes me feel like you're generalizing in any way that's inappropriate. Now, I know there's people who feel that way now, and I know
we're going to get angry comments.
And
we're going to.
I know. Well, but hang on a second. I know what news stories you're talking about, and I know that people are really concerned with trying to figure out, all right, is there something to this theory that gender is on a spectrum? And because I think it's pretty much agreed upon that sex is not on a spectrum. It's pretty binary, and unless you're born in a certain way with certain differences or deficiencies with your organs. But generally speaking, as far as I'm aware, and you can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, sex is binary. But gender, they're saying now, is maybe on a spectrum, and people experience it differently. And it's like, okay, fair enough. But I also think that there's a certain level of self-awareness that is required in order to even know that that's the case for you. And certainly in a child, I think that if you're seeing what you think might be an indicator that they don't quite fall into the box of boy or girl in terms of their gender, that they have to be a certain age before you can make the conclusion then that they are definitely outside of the box in terms of it being a binary thing between, male or female. So I don't know. Like, I want to say that there's nothing to that argument, and that's just, silliness that people are dealing with because but I also don't want to make people feel like they're wrong for thinking that might be true, because I'm not a scientist about all this stuff. I don't know, but as a dad, I look at my children and I go, all right, just in the way that they behave when we give them food is completely different.
Right.
And it has nothing to do with, like, we're basically raising our children as identically as we can, giving them the same experiences because they're all so close in age. Their experience of their childhood is going to be very similar.
Right.
And my wife and I are not making choices to treat any of our children differently than any of the rest of them, at least not consciously. And so knowing that and the pretty stable environment that they're growing up in, I see wild differences in their behavior based on their gender.
Right.
And so that seems to me an indication on the face of the thing, prima facie, that they are different. Something is different about boys and girls, and raising them is obviously different. And I think that's why people say, oh, you got your boy first, because there's this sense that it's easier to raise a boy or better to raise a boy or whatever. I disagree, by the way.
Right. And I disagree in a lot of different ways, but in those differences, there are going to be, I don't want to say pluses and minuses, but things like, okay, when you got old enough to drive and could then go off on your own, we were less concerned about someone harming you.
Right.
You might get mugged. You might get beat up, something like that. I mean, I would hope that wouldn't end in you being killed, stabbed or something like that. But I did not fear that someone was going to take advantage of you the way that they would your sister. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so that's different. That's different. The emotional differences. You sometimes had your heart broken. Yeah. But it was different from your sister getting your heart broken. And I don't know whether that was just because of my reaction also. It hurt more to see your sister cry than it did to see you cry.
Yeah, that's fair.
And the likes, dislikes, the desires, the reactions, the emotions, all of it is different. Mm-hmm. So when you're raising sons and daughters, they're different experiences. And when you and I would spend time together, it was different from when I would spend time with your sister just one-on-one.
Yeah.
The topics that we would talk about, the things that we would laugh about, they were just different.
Yeah.
And I can't even I don't want to say that there was a hardened formula or this is the algorithm that you have to plug into.
Do you see how careful we're being about this? Like, isn't it crazy that in this day and age you have to be this careful just talking about our experience?
Well, yeah. And
it's so anecdotal. Like, none of this necessarily applies to everyone, and yet we have to be so careful not to offend anyone.
But I'm not trying to offend anyone.
Well, neither am I, but I'm being careful because it's like, man, if somebody else has had a different experience with this, then I don't want to make them feel like their experience was wrong or incorrect.
We're just talking about the personal experiences that we've had raising our own children. That's all I'm talking about right now. And even it's fun to even watch you with your kids because I'm not raising your kids. So I'm observing.
Yeah.
And I'm still seeing in your children a lot of the things that we experienced in ours.
Yeah.
The way that they react to things. Like both Edie and Eli had hammers on when they came over yesterday. And they were all, we're doing construction and we're hammering. And Eli was breaking things.
Yeah,
literally. Like I had to go, buddy, no. That's holding that wall up. Like you can't hit that hard. Like, whoa, that's impressive.
He's a strong boy.
Yes. Whereas Edie, and it's, people are going to think that this is a criticism, and it's not. I was just observing. She's over there going tap, 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 tap on one spot of wood and on a big pile of wood, and she could have been there all day, and it would have never given any indentation.
Yeah.
But Eli was physically breaking things. He broke some concrete, and I'm like, buddy, please don't do that, because that's now Grandpa has to fix something.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just very different.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that probably answers the question at the beginning, right? So what are the differences between raising boys versus raising girls? Like, they couldn't be more different.
Yeah. It is vast. There are those kind of similar experiences, but the way that they experience them, the way that it kind of makes itself manifest in them is just very different. And I'm not saying either one is a plus or a minus. The only thing as a dad that I would say is that I was more protective of my girls. Mm-hmm. I was just more protective of my girls. Yeah. I did not want them to be hurt or harmed in any way.
The exact same way now as a dad.
And some of you might call me sexist, and I'm okay with you calling me that, because I'm just going to say that it's just different.
I'm not okay with you calling me that. I'll fight you.
But if you want to redefine the terms and the way people feel, I don't know.
No, but in all seriousness, like, look, live your life, make your choices. This has been our experience.
Right. And it's okay, by the way, that it is different. I think that's the other problem, is people are trying to say, oh, it should be exactly the same, the way you raise a son and the way you raise a daughter. I do not agree with that at all.
No, because
when people say that, I don't even care how many degrees you have. You're a psychologist and you teach someplace. I don't care. I disagree with you. Mm-hmm. It is not the same. Yeah. It is when we had to sadly give back some dogs that we had gotten, and they had really attached themselves to your sister.
Yeah.
And this was a hard thing to happen, but the dogs were starting to bite. And they loved your sister, and they hated all of us.
Yeah.
And we would try to interact with these dogs, and they would bite us. And I'm like, we can't have that. We can't have the dogs growling at us and biting us. And because whenever she wasn't around, it got really dangerous.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't anyone there that they liked, so they would growl and bite at everyone. Mm-hmm. So I said, we've got to give them back to the person that gave them to us originally. And when she came to get them, your sister just broke down and started crying. And it was really hard for me, because I immediately wanted to say, stop, keep the dogs,
like, we'll make it work somehow.
We'll make it work somehow. I'll build another house in the back just for you and the dogs.
Oh my gosh.
Something like that. You just your heart just breaks.
Yeah.
And yet there were times when you would go through hard times, and I'd be like, yeah, that's just hard.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that sucks.
Sorry, that sucks. Let's go grab those foam swords and make each other bleed. Let's go. Let's get outside.
And a lot of times that would make me feel better.
And I think that's just how we're hardwired.
Right. It's an indicator of there are certain things that are inherently different about men and women. And isn't it crazy that statement that I just said is considered controversial?
Well, what's weird about it is, at one point in time back in, I think in the 80s, Time magazine, the cover was, "It's now proven boys and girls are different."
Oh,
it was a cover story on Time.
Interesting.
And when I looked at it, I laughed.
Yeah.
Because I was like, what do you mean it's now proven? Like,
and also, who is reading this?
Well, I think people were interested in, all right, what was the proof? But the point is, the proof is the fact that any of us can observe and look that we're just different. Yeah. Guys and girls are different. And there are going to be some tendencies. Now, does that mean that I can't like to bake? I love baking.
Yeah.
And so some people might go, oh, what is that? Is it part of your feminine side? I don't think so. I think it's part of me.
I don't know.
I like to bake. Now, I also like tools, but I don't necessarily watch sports. So I'm an enigma. Like, where do you put me?
I love football, and I also really like shopping for clothes. So, I mean, Try to fit that one in the box, boys.
Speaking of, by the way, in our next bonus issue, you are going down because it's going to be jeans versus cargo pants.
Let's go.
That's the next bonus episode. And
y'all already know who's going to win.
And it's perfectly fine, by the way, if you want to become a patron just for 1 month, just so you can.
It's also perfectly fine.
Battle-rama.
If you want to watch the beatdown that's about to happen.
Because it's on like Donkey Kong.
Next time we get together, this is going to, I'm telling you, you might as well just go ahead and admit defeat.
Before we even started.
Might as well admit defeat now.
Before we even started. It's ridiculous.
This is going to be, it's going to be rough.
Down. We have the best listeners in the world, and we get incredible feedback. Just let us know if there's anything that you want us to be talking about, or if you totally disagree with us, that's cool.
Yeah, put it in the comments, and we'll try to respond to as many of them as we can. And thank y'all for listening. We really appreciate you.
Thanks so much for listening, Paterfamilias.